If you've ever tried reading ancient historical texts, they can feel incredibly dry. And today, we're diving into an explainer of a specific document that is pretty notorious for being tough to get through, the biblical book of 1 Chronicles. But listen, we aren't just reading dusty old history today. We're going to uncover a massive, emotional narrative hidden right smack in the middle of this seemingly endless ancient text. It's the kind of profound twist that completely flips how we look at failure, tragedy, and hope. So let's get into it.
So, quick question for you. Why are biblical genealogies so incredibly hard to read? I mean, you know the passages I'm talking about, right? So-and-so became the father of so-and-so, and on it goes. Naturally, when we hit these repetitive lists of names, our brains just kind of tune out. It's literally the ultimate ancient cure for insomnia. But for this explainer, I want you to think of this as a detective hunt. We aren't just scanning names, we're actively hunting for the hidden anomalies. Because when an ancient author breaks the repetitive pattern of a family tree, they are basically flashing a giant neon sign, screaming at us to pay close attention.
To actually understand this anomaly, we gotta zoom out and look at the context. In chapters 1 through 6, the authors, who remember were returned exiles, really prioritized the surviving prominent tribes. Their entire nation had been leveled by Babylon, and they'd just come back from a devastating captivity. So naturally, they focus heavily on Judah, the royal line of David, and the Levites, who were the priests. They're systematically trying to rebuild their totally fractured national identity.
But then, the text hits chapter 7, and boom! It suddenly drops this surprisingly massive number, 22,600. The text goes out of its way to highlight this huge military count for the northern tribes of Israel. Now, this is weird, because those tribes had essentially been wiped off the map and scattered by the Assyrian Empire long before this book was even written. And here's the really fascinating part. The text explicitly notes that this massive figure doesn't represent the broken people currently returning from exile. No, this dates all the way back to King David's golden era. We're talking their absolute peak of power. It creates this totally jarring contrast. On one side, you've got the past glory, right? David's mighty, holy army. On the other side is the present reality. Defeated, returned exiles, living under foreign rule, probably feeling utterly insignificant. So you realize this wasn't just some dry census. This was an intentional, historical reminder to a deeply discouraged people. The author is essentially giving them this massive pep talk hidden right inside the numbers, reminding them of their true identity as a once powerful, united people. But right in the middle of this grand historical overview, we hit a total roadblock. A sudden, tragic story just interrupts the list. Out of nowhere, we shift from this high-level military count to an incredibly intimate, heartbreaking family story concerning the tribe of Ephraim. Why? Well, when the pacing suddenly shifts from a macro-level census down to a micro-level tragedy, we have to stop and ask what the ancient author is trying to show us here. If we trace Ephraim's complex family tree, we can see the line going down through the generations: Ephraim, Shutelah, Bered, Tahath, and so on. But then, almost like a glitch in the record, the text suddenly jumps back up to the patriarch, Ephraim. It turns out he has 2 other sons, Ezer and Elead, and this is exactly where the narrative completely breaks its pattern. Something terrible happens to these 2 brothers that derails the entire family. Here's the exact quote from 1 Chronicles 7:21 detailing the anomaly. It says, "Ezer and Elead were killed by the native-born men of Gath when they went down to seize their livestock." It's such a startling admission. I mean, in a chapter dedicated to celebrating mighty warriors from Israel's golden era, we suddenly find ourselves reading about 2 brothers losing their lives in a botched cattle raid. Crazy, right? The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that this was not a heroic battle. Ezer and Elead didn't die bravely defending their homeland. They weren't noble martyrs. No, this was a shameful tragedy born entirely out of their own greed. They went down to the ancient, powerful city of Gath simply to steal cattle. They wanted to take what wasn't theirs, and it cost them their lives in a completely senseless, avoidable way. The text then gives us this deeply human picture of the aftermath. First, we see a father's raw grief. Ephraim mourns for many days. Can you even imagine that mix of heartbreak and sheer shame? His sons died as thieves. But then we see his brother Manasseh's support. Manasseh comes to comfort him. And notice, the text doesn't say Manasseh offered profound theological answers or judged Ephraim for how he raised his sons. He just showed up.
it perfectly captures the power of a quiet, communal presence in times of deep shame. Because honestly, sometimes non-judgmental presence is the absolute greatest comfort you can offer. Now, if the story ended right there, it would just be this sad, cautionary footnote. But the narrative pivots to a core message that is incredibly profound. God's history does not end at the site of human failure. This is the main takeaway the ancient authors desperately wanted to impart to the discouraged exiles reading this text. Our worst mistakes, our deepest regrets, our most shameful family tragedies, they do not finalize our story. So Ephraim and his wife eventually have another son, a new life born after the tragedy. But the grief is still so incredibly heavy that Ephraim names him Beriah, which translates to because disaster fell upon his house. I mean, imagine giving a newborn baby a name that literally means disaster. It serves as a permanent living name tag of the family's tragic sorrow. Every single time that father called his son's name, he was essentially remembering his greatest failure. Which naturally leads us to ask the ultimate question, right? What becomes of the son named Disaster? What actually happens to a child born into such a heavy, guilt-ridden family legacy? Does the stain of his brother's greed and his father's deep sorrow just ruin his genealogical line forever? Well, remember, we are reading a chronological list of generations here, so we actually get to see exactly how this plays out over the coming centuries. Let's trace Beriah's lineage down through the generations. The text starts moving forward again. From Beriah, we get Repha and Resheph, then Telah, Tahan, Ladan, and Ammihud. The names just keep flowing generation after generation, slowly distancing the family from that initial tragedy at Gath. But the author is doing something highly intentional here. They're slowly moving us closer to a climactic reveal that completely flips the script on the legacy of disaster. As we reach the final steps of this lineage, the twist reveals itself. From Ammihud comes Elishama, from Elishama comes Nun, and from Nun comes Joshua. Yes, that Joshua. It is the ultimate mic drop twist of this ancient text. From the lineage of the son literally named Disaster comes Joshua, one of the greatest leaders in all of Israel's history, the very man who would eventually lead the Israelites into the Promised Land. No way, right? Just look at the stark, powerful contrast between these two figures. On one side, you have the origin, Beriah, meaning disaster. On the other side, the destination, Joshua, whose name translates to Savior, or the Lord saves. A great savior bloomed directly from the root of a shameful tragedy. The very family line that was marked by human foolishness, greed, and death, that was the exact line used to bring about massive rescue and leadership centuries later. And this is where this ancient text actually brings us right into our own present lives. Think about it for a second. Do you have a Beriah in your life right now? Are you currently harboring deep regrets? A past failure or a situation that feels like an absolute, unmitigated disaster? Maybe it's a consequence of your own mistakes, just like the greed of Ezer and Elead. It's so incredibly easy to look at those moments in our lives and think, well, that's it. That's the end of my story. I'm permanently marked by this disaster.
But as this ancient explainer shows us, that couldn't be further from the truth. The very place you consider a failure is already being shaped into tomorrow's salvation. Your darkest moments, your biggest mistakes, the things you've labeled as total disasters, those are the exact raw materials being used to build your future hope. What looks like a tragic end today might just be the very foundation for your greatest victory tomorrow. It really makes you wonder, what hidden Joshua is waiting to be born out of your current disaster?